What the hell happened to Russell and Hunter? It was a question I was asked on Facebook the other day. So today, I'll tell you my side of the story. Hey, it's your boy, Rob Hunter. What's happening with you? Hope all is groovy. It's been almost 3 years. And I think the biggest disappointment I have is I didn't get to say goodbye on air. But that's typically how it works in my industry. If you don't want to continue on, they don't usually allow you to get on the mic because from their standpoint, they want to move on too. And I respect that. I have no grudge against anyone at iHeartMedia or 550 KFYI. I worked with some really talented, really phenomenal people, including my boss. Our program director at 550 KFYI is Aaron Trimmer. Best boss I had in radio. He helped me really get better as a talk show host. And because of him, in his tutelage and his mentorship, Mike Russell and I, my co-host on Russell and Hunter, were top of the ratings. And that was a phenomenal achievement. So I'll take you back to the decision process. Radio broadcasting works with contracts, much like sports does. Typically what happens is you sign a 3-year deal with a team option, an iHeart option. So I had signed a 4-year deal, essentially, right before we started the show. I was in a different role at the time. I was doing the KFYI Download 5 a.m. news show, which I really loved. But there were some changes that happened at the station. A guy that was doing the morning show, Mike Broomhead, went to a different station, and that created an opening. So they took James T. Harris, who was working afternoons at the time, and moved him to mornings. And then the afternoon show became Russell and Hunter, which I loved also because Mike Russell's my big bro. He's my big brother. I've learned so much from Mike, continue to do so. Just talked to Mike a couple days ago, as a matter of fact. And this was like a dream come true that I get to do a radio show with my homeboy, my main man, my big bro, Mike Russell. So we started the show on March 9th, 2020. The date may sound familiar. It was the week before the pandemic kicked in and Arizona and the world shut down. But we took it in stride. We worked from home for 6 weeks. And then when we got back into the studio, we just kept doing our thing. And our strategy, Mike and I's, was to approach our radio show as if it was at a pub, a bar, a restaurant. You're hanging out with your buddies, you're listening to conversation, and you're joining in. And we had a great run. So about 6 months before I was going to be offered a new contract, I knew it was coming. They wanted me to stay. I had I'd say I had misgivings about it. Radio was a career that I always loved. It was something I felt called to do. Starting at the age of 14, my voice dropped. A couple of people said to me, "Hey, you got a great radio voice." And I was like, "What? People do that as a job?" I'm like, "That sounds kind of fun." So I looked into it. My high school at the time, Whitman-Hanson Regional High School in Massachusetts, had a radio broadcasting class. So I tried it out. And I really liked getting behind that microphone. My first exposure, speaking to an audience, was doing morning announcements at Whitman-Hanson High School. I think there were 4 of us that would rotate, go up early and spread the message around the school through the speaker system. And that also was a lot of fun. In Boston, there's a college called Emerson College. They had a hip-hop show at night, and I loved hip-hop music. So combining all of these things, the 2 people telling me I have a great radio voice, the morning announcements, the radio broadcasting class, I knew I wanted to go host that hip-hop show. And there were a couple of choices that I had. I could have gone to Northeastern University and studied engineering and done radio on the side, but I really wanted to do that hip-hop show. I really wanted to be on the radio. So I went in that direction. And from there, I continued that calling and got into talk radio. Starting in Gainesville, Florida, back to Boston, to New Orleans, to Farmington, New Mexico, and eventually to Phoenix, where I worked at 2 different radio stations. the two talk stations in town. And I think as I was considering whether I wanted to do another 3 or 4 years, age was a factor. I'm now 48, so this is a decision I made at between 44 and 45. Whether or not this is what I wanted the next 3 or 4 years of my life to be. In a studio, behind a microphone, talking about American politics and culture. And the more I asked myself that question, the more I could not come up with a yes. So I went on a lot of walks to process all of this because this is the only career I've ever known, the only career I ever wanted, the only career that I loved. But I didn't love what I was talking about anymore. I think that if I'm honest with you, I started to change. Because I realized something critically important for myself. And what I realized is I'm only in control of me. And I'm responsible for living in the world no matter what. And that was the major lesson during the pandemic for me, and talking about it every single day for 2-3 years was that it didn't matter what the government said. It didn't matter what the president said. It didn't matter what the senator said or the local politicians said or the mayor or the health officials. Because I still had to live and I had to figure out my own way forward. And that was the best part of the pandemic for me because I changed the concept of freedom that I adore so much. I got into talk radio and started studying American history, the Declaration of Independence, and that all men are created equal, and that we believe in this country in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The concept of freedom, that you are born free with certain inalienable rights. And for a long time, I thought it was the government's job to protect those rights, to give me those rights in a way. But I realized something during the pandemic, that freedom extends beyond laws. Freedom is sovereignty, agency, your ability to live by your own rules, to create your own world, so to speak. Because if I really think about it philosophically, it doesn't much matter what is happening in D.C. to me. Is it important? Can make the case that it is, but I could also make the case that it isn't. That politics is just a reality show. Yeah, there are laws determined and they spend my money that I make in my business and they take a pretty good portion of it. And they spend it unwisely. And there's boatloads of corruption. Yeah, all of that is true and all of that matters. But what matters more is what I'm in control of. That's me. My attitude, how I live my life, what I pay attention to, what I focus on. And as I started going through this process of asking myself whether or not I wanted to continue in Russell and Hunter, I couldn't come up with a solid yes because I had shifted and changed. Understanding that the difference that I make in the world, if I can, as I try to, is about the way that I live my life. How aligned in my values that I am. And quite frankly, another big part of this was I thought politics got boring. Same story over and over again. Talking about the same man over and over again. And I didn't want to spend 3 to 4 more years talking about that. That's the truth. Or at least part of the truth. And I would go on these long walks in my neighborhood in Phoenix to try to really figure this out because it's a big task to acknowledge that you don't want to do your calling, the profession you cared so much about. And then I entered negotiations into iHeart, and I was honest right from the start because I think they offered me a contract in April, and the contract was fine. It was a bit of a money dispute, but that was not the driving factor in my decision to say no. Because what I really wanted to do was different than the business model can do. I wanted to shift away from talking about politics all the time. I wanted to be able to take the show on the road. I wanted to have more time out of the studio. But it was just not something that iHeart wanted to do. And I understand why. I get it. And I don't begrudge them for that, but it was at least worth having a conversation. So the contract comes in April. I look at it. Obviously, I want more money. There was no more money to give. I get that as well. And again, I was making good money, so I can't complain about that. But I had that conversation, I think, come around June, July. I mentioned to my boss and my boss's boss that I don't think I'm the guy for this anymore. I don't think I'm the guy that's fits this station the best. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I'll sum it up for you real quickly. The audience deserves someone that is with them. And it's not that I'm saying I wasn't with the audience. That's quite the opposite. But I just wasn't the guy to carry this flag anymore. Because I'm carrying a different flag. And I'll get into that here in just a bit. And I was honest about it. I was torn about it. And I admitted that. So I think come June, July, we gave ourselves a month or two to really figure it out. And then we had to sit down in August. And that's when I said, the truth is, I don't want to do this anymore. Because no part of me felt it was right. Right for me and right for them. Because if my heart wasn't going to be in it, I'm certainly not the right guy for them. And the best part about it was having that honest conversation and the respect that my boss, Aaron, and his boss, Steve, gave me. Both phenomenal leaders in their own right. Both helped me tremendously. They were disappointed, so was I, that we couldn't work it out. Because there was something else that was calling me. Adventure, call it. That adventure was to Europe. My wife, Amy, and her parents were going to spend a month in Europe. It was my in-laws' 50th wedding anniversary. So they wanted to celebrate in Italy, in London, and in Paris. Rome and Florence in Italy. And I really thought hard about whether or not I wanted to miss that opportunity. Because how often do you have an opportunity to go to Europe for a month? And you can't do that typically if you work for somebody else, if you're an employee. And behind the scenes, my wife had started a company a couple of years prior to this, right around the end of the pre-pandemic era, right around the start of the pandemic. And her company was built on corporations and helping companies change effectively with a three-pronged approach: mindfulness, collaboration, and communication. So I created a communication course for her called Master Your Message, and it outlines all the principles I used on the radio to be a really effective communicator, to be a clear communicator, to get your point across so that everyone understands it, and how to influence others. Also gets into how to listen, how to process emotions so that you don't communicate out of anger and say something you regret. And that opened me up to this possibility that I could do something on my own. And that's been a journey in and of itself to try to figure out business. Because you go from having a schedule every day, a deadline every day. We were on the air on Russell and Hunter at 4 o'clock. And whatever I had to do to get ready, I had until 4 o'clock. But when you're an entrepreneur, there are not necessarily deadlines. So you are wide open. And that leads to a lot of experimentation and a lot of trial and error, which is the way I operate. Oh, and a side note here, I'm only telling you my side of the story. I can only speak to what happened to the Hunter side of Russell and Hunter. Mike's story is his to tell, not mine. So for me, this was incredibly personal. It was incredibly hard to tell Mike this too, because that was the best part of the job, working with Mike, seeing Mike every day, hanging out with Mike, creating something together. And without him, there's no way I could have achieved the career goal being the top-rated radio host in Phoenix, beating the station that fired me by a mile. That was phenomenal. It was great that we get to share that together. But he's also so great that he understood too, that I wanted to do different things with the show that just didn't fit in with the company's vision of what the show is. And that's fine, right? That's no big deal. I knew that was an uphill battle to begin with. But I wasn't feeling it anymore. Maybe I was burnt out. But I understood through this process, and one of my life theories, that language is contagious. Because what I was listening to was impacting me in so many different ways. It made me think about the world in a certain way, because that's what I mean with language is contagious. What you listen to, what you read, what you see, what you hear, impacts the way that you think, and it shapes your perception of the world. And since I've stepped away from that microphone, I have a completely different perception of the world, 180-degree different perception of the world. In fact, I would say to you, the world you hear about is not real. The world you experience is real. And getting back to this DC bubble, I was living in a DC bubble in Phoenix, focusing my attention on the drama that is politics, the corruption that is politics, the power that is politics. And I was not focusing on my own reality. And now that I focus on my own reality, Washington has a very small place in it. And you can argue with me about that all you want. Because I've realized that what happens in the reality show in Washington doesn't really impact me that much. Yeah, sure, prices are high. That impacts me. But policy discussions and immigration discussions, they don't really play a part in my life. And they do for others, sure. But for most of us, we're arguing about theories and talking about things we'll never experience. But our views in some ways are being shaped by those conversations. And they take us out of our now and our focus on ourselves and how we are living day to day, our own value system. Washington is not going to change because of a talk show host in Phoenix, Arizona. Washington is not going to change from the inside. It's only going to change from the outside. Think about the American Revolution. Sam Adams and Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, they didn't work within the government to change it. They created a new one and made a declaration that that's exactly what we're doing. I'm not necessarily advocating that, but I'm just being a realist. Change doesn't come from a system that's already built. That's why so many companies have struggles changing, which is why Amy invented her company, Painted Porch Strategies, because she can come from the outside and help you change, because the systems are too strong and too built, too systematic, ingrained to really make movements on. So that was a personal realization. And I said on the air many times, it doesn't matter what Dr. Anthony Fauci says. It doesn't matter what Donald Trump says. It doesn't matter what someone far away says. It only matters how I live in the world, because I have to live in it regardless of what's happening. So the more I thought about going back, I compared it to what I could do on my own, starting my own business. And I got to go to Europe, and Europe was amazing. Having a month to not work, to spend 9-10 days in Rome, it was phenomenal. We, together as a family, had such an awesome time. My younger brother came with us. Got to experience that with him. My dad and stepmother came with us for the Italy part. We did 9-10 days in Rome. Then we spent 5 or 6 days in Florence and wine country. Drank wine, stayed at a winery, these gorgeous views. Went to France, Paris for the first time. And this is another example where reality is different from what you hear. You may have heard, oh, the French don't like Americans. French are rude to Americans. Not my experience. It was the exact opposite. And everything was delicious. Paris is beautiful. I was moved by art for the first time, staring at a Van Gogh painting and going, wow, you can feel the genius, the madness maybe, in what he created and left behind. And even that, the Van Gogh experience, was preceded by a stop in Rome at the Borgia Museum, looking at a painting by Raphael. Hundreds of years old this painting is, this painting of Jesus being carried after his death. It is so stunningly realistic, you can't help but be moved by it. So I knew then that I made the right decision because I'm being moved in my own reality, my own experience, what I can see, what I can look at in my own eyes versus looking at something that's 2,000 miles away. I know I'm getting a little philosophical here, but the question was asked, so I thought I would answer it for you. And then we closed the trip in London, in which my friend New York Rob came with us, my mother came with us. So we got to experience London, got to go see some shows, eat delicious food in London, all together. That's going to be one of those experiences when I'm 100, I'm still going to be thinking about. Had I spent another 3 or 4 years in radio, I would have missed that. And I would have regretted that. Because the studio time all blended together. And then there is this aspect of freedom in my different relationship with it. That it isn't just government, that it isn't just the Declaration of Independence. It's my own self-freedom from some of the things I learned that aren't true. Some of the things I thought about the world that aren't true. Sometimes it's called conditioning. Other people call it programming. I just call it language is contagious. Things that people told you that aren't true. Rumors, gossip, whatever. Mistruths. And that's what I've come to realize too, is that I think most of what I thought was true is bullshit. And giving myself space has allowed me to see that. That's freedom. Freedom from my past, freedom for myself, freedom to be free from obligations of going to an office every single day. And that's not for everybody. Look, entrepreneurship is not for everybody. It is challenging. It is difficult because it is so wide open. And it's taken me almost 3 years to really figure out what I'm doing. But that's what freedom does. It tests you. It takes you out of the normal American system and gives you one that you get to create on your own, living in the world regardless of what's happening in it. So I'm going to take you back to those walks in this decision. I knew that if I was going to continue as a talk show host, the way that the media was trending, you can see that it's becoming more about division. Division's the world's largest economy. The news is built on it. The more tension there is, the more trouble there is, the more explosions there are, more people watch the news. Ad rates go up. Companies get bigger. Executives get richer. All built on division. Meanwhile, the vast majority of life is good, filled with good people. There's a lot of people in the middle too. But my experience in life has been a lot more positive than negative. A lot more real than the news suggests. The news suggests that if you leave your house, you're going to die. You're going to get sick. You're going to get in a car crash. You're going to die in a plane crash because they thrive off of that. And since I was part of the discussion about news and culture, that's what I focused on. I covered every major shooting in America from 2000 to 2023. I covered the pandemic, presidential elections, terrorist attacks, wars. That's what I talked about. Those things are absolutely real. Those things have real impacts on so many people. But there's so much more to life than just that. that is only a portion of life, part of life. And it's only a part of your life if you choose it to be. I don't want to get too much on my soapbox here, but this is just that realization that I've had and continue to have. That division is what drives trillions of dollars in spending, trillions of dollars in economic activity, propaganda networks. And I sensed that in 2023. Where the media was going to go was just going to be more divided. So if you pictured two arrows, let's say, they were distant, but traveling in the same width, right? Let's say they were 6 inches apart, the right arrow, the left arrow. But come, I don't know, you could probably even trace this back to the war in Iraq, 2003. It starts to shift from 6 inches to 7. So you go through the Bush administration, away from 9/11, we're getting further apart. And I witnessed this. You could see it in the language, the way that Republicans referred to Democrats, Democrats referred to Republicans, got nastier, became more toxic. So the 7 inches became 8, became 10, became 12. And now, every day, the distance just grows and grows and grows and grows. But to me, that's not real life. That's the reality show we've created to live in based on our political views, where we yell at each other, we're scared of each other, whatever the case may be. And I don't want to be a part of that. Because one of the things I brought to the radio, for me, was the concept of freedom, that you have the ability to choose what's best for you. Because no one knows what's best for you other than you. Now, we do listen to others' advice all the time, and we take advice, and that's great. But ultimately, to be fully free, you know what's best for you. And I knew that continuing on and this path was not best for me. And trust me, I was making way more money doing that than I am now. Than I have in my first 3 years in business. I made more money in 2022 than I've made combined in my 3 years as an entrepreneur. So money was not the driving decision here. But another thing I brought to the radio was truth and accuracy. Yeah, sure, I told little white lies. Yeah, I told you that I supported candidates and said I was voting for candidates that I didn't vote for. But that's everybody on the radio, baby. That ain't just me. But truth and accuracy became more and more important to me. And then equality and justice. Equality and justice come from people, not from governments. Again, those systems, they're too strong, they're too built, too massive to change. I mean, even look at what we're seeing now. There was promises that the system was going to change, but the system didn't really change. It's just adapted to where the power goes. So the beneficiaries of the structure are the ones in power. So if you go back to 2003 and the Iraq War, and we have, that was last for 20 years. And then we have the Obamacare decision that was completely partisan. That put more of a divide in America. And then, of course, the election of Trump. And instead of it being back-to-back years, it's Trump, Biden, Trump. So by the end of it, we're 12 years in with no interest in trying to solve division because there's too much money in it. So in the long and short, that's what I weighed in my decision to walk away from a career that I loved, that I was getting paid really well to do. Because going back to those values, the change comes from the outside, not the inside. The change doesn't come from me talking about Washington on the radio. It comes from uplifting standard bearers with heart-centered values to drive change from the outside. And that could be you as a business owner. The more people see your values, the more people are attracted to your values, the better people are treated, your customers, your clients. That's what being a standard bearer is. If you're a leader, whether you're leadership by title or leadership by attitude. If you're the standard bearer, people will follow you. And here's the characteristics of a standard bearer. You're bold, you're visible, and you're out front, because that's how you redefine your industry or redefine your team or redefine your company. That's how change gets done. It doesn't come from inside the system. It comes from the leader and the business owner willing to do things in an elevated standard, raising the standards, treating people better, not giving in to our natural instincts to judge and divide, working past those to provide better service. That is what's taken me 3 years to really put together. That what I do, like I did on the radio, is work with standard bearers to help them become more visible, because that is how we change. One at a time, collectively, doing it together. That's how we make this place better, this country better. That's how we make life better. That is why I no longer host Russell and Hunter. If you have any questions, hit me up. Rob@robhunter.me. That's the email. robhunter.me is the website. This is Equal Matters. We'll talk to you soon. Cheers.